Okay, we are going to continue our discussion on Abraham Cahan's The Imported Bridegroom. This is part two, and this will take us to the end of this text. I am on page 915, the beginning of chapter 6, and this is Azrael returning to America with Shia. And let me read at the bottom of the page. The nearer Azrael, with a prodigy in tow, came to New York, the deeper did Provely sink into the golden mist of romance, and the more did the great American city grow in his mind. Every mile added detail to the picture, and every new bit of detail made it dearer to his heart. He was going home. He felt it more keenly, more thrillingly every day, every hour, every minute. This marks, I think, an important moment in sort of solidifying Azrael's transformation. The Provely, his experience of going back to the old country, to his native land, was not what he thought it was going to be, and he realized that he was different than the person he was when he left. He was now an American, a new person, a new kind of identity, although he still is stuck in both his new identity and also this kind of, as he calls, romance and longing for his past. But the longing is lessened now as he is returning to America. And it says here again, he was going home. His youth in Provely, again, is textualized here as the golden mist of romance. And it seems something from a fairy tale. We look back on the past with a sense of nostalgia. And he's a businessman. He's been successful in many ways. He's achieved the American dream, and he is returning to America. On page 916. So Shia doesn't speak English. He's never been to America. This is all new for him. So I think we have two important elements here, that Shia has never been to America before. So he is of the old country, not familiar with the culture, the race, the American dream, that sort of thing. And also, there is a generational divide. We explored a little bit the generational divide between Israel and Flora, and there's one certainly between Israel and Shia, Shia being a young man, and he's going to have a different sense of things, different desires than perhaps what Israel would like. So on page 916, I am 6 paragraphs down, beginning with America is a fine country. Anybody with me? Okay. America is a fine country, is it not? The old man rejoined, but it can't hold a candle to Flora. Wait till you see her. You just try to be a good boy, he kept murmuring. Stick to your Talmud. So what Azrael here is saying, I think a couple of things. One, he's expressing his love for Flora, that he's trying to do something for his daughter that he loves very much, but he has trouble connecting. So I think part of this is a bit cautionary in that while this is expressing Azrael's love for Flora, he doesn't quite understand her and her desires, and we're going to continue to see that. He says, you just try to be a good boy. And this could be just sort of an offhanded comment like, here you are, my soon-to-be son-in-law. But I think it's sort of cautionary. You need to be good. Stay on track. And how do you do that? Stick to your Talmud. The Talmud are the interpretations of the Pentateuch or the Torah. So this is a bit cautionary. And maybe in the back of Azrael's mind, he recognizes that Shia, being one of youth, may begin to stray. Or Azrael recognizes that desire for things more American, much like he desired when he came to America. On page 917, I think a nice moment of 4 paragraphs down. Flora was alone in the house, and her unconscious welcome was all the sweeter to Azrael's soul for the grieving note which ran through it. His heart throbbed with violence. Shia's sank in awe. He had never heard a piano except through the window of some nobleman's house. So what is the role of music here a little bit? I think there's different kinds of music here in the text. There's the music that we encountered in Provli, the music of the synagogue, religious singing, and there's also the music that even Shia was introduced to back in Provli through a nobleman's house, indicating that this might be not Jewish music or religious music, but something secular, and it holds a kind of attraction. So immediately, Shia is being opened up to a new world. On page 918, Shia is introduced to Flora, and I think it's worthwhile for us to take a look at this. On the top of page 918. Well, Flora, guess what sort of present your papa has brought you, he said, reddening to his ears. I bet you won't hit it if you keep on guessing till tomorrow. No girl has ever got such a present as long as America is America. Which I think is interesting because what Azrael is trying to do is arrange this marriage, which he eventually succeeds at, and this in many ways I think is non-American. Flora's eyes danced with joyous anticipation. Her mind was ablaze with diamonds, rubies, emeralds, sapphires, pearls. Does this indicate that Flora is a materialistic young lady? Is that an accusation that you could argue? Maybe, but it's not, this is also part of what it means to be an American, the pursuit of the American dream, which is measured by wealth and materiality. In the same way, Azrael falls into that pattern when he says, I have got a bridegroom for you, a $15,000 one, handsomest and smartest fellow on earth. So the present that Azrael is bringing to Flora, he leads with his material value, how much money it cost him to bring him here. And then a few lines down, Flora's brain was in a whirl. What was Flora's reaction to this? She was incredulous. As I said, her mind was in a whirl. She just could not believe that this was something her father was trying to arrange. On page 919, we are told exactly what Flora is looking for. About 5 lines down from the top of the page. But then her mind was firmly made up, and she had boasted to her friends that she was bound to marry a doctor. And here this boy was not even going to be a businessman, but an Orthodox rabbi or something of the sort. So we have a hierarchy in America, which is different than the kind of hierarchy that existed in Provli, that being a religious scholar in America is not something that is looked up to. That theology, religious faith has become secondary to material pursuits, to the American dream. And that Flora is interested in marrying a doctor, what's wrong with that? A young girl, a young woman wanting to marry a doctor to perhaps live a life of luxury. A doctor replaces the religious scholar in America as a person at the top of the food chain. And is being a doctor a worthy endeavor? Absolutely. But Azrael doesn't quite see this, and this becomes a source of their friction with one another. Flora is also responding to Shia the way that a person in America, unfamiliar, a person who's not Jewish in America, might respond to Shia, even though Flora is Jewish and Shia is Jewish. They are even within this larger group of Jewishness. There are differences. Of course there are. It is problematic to overgeneralize any ethnic or religious group. Shia is Jewish, but he's Orthodox, comes from the old country. Flora is Jewish. She has grown up in New York, and she reacts to him in a way that other Americans might react to any other immigrant that arrives who looks different. And the bottom page 921, a few lines down. Flora was in her bedroom. Anybody with me? The paragraph beginning, never mind blushing. A couple lines down from that. Flora was in her bedroom, the place of her voluntary exile, most of the time that her compulsory sweetheart was in the house. Her father was kind and attentive to her as usual, and never mentioned Shia's name to her, but she knew that he was irrevocably bent upon the marriage, and her mood often verged on suicide. This is the omniscient narrator telling us how Flora feels, not Flora telling us how she feels in terms of maybe she's being overly dramatic or whatnot. So we have to take this at face value, that this is truthful, that this is sincere. This is the turmoil that Flora is in. Her mood often verged on suicide. Could it really be that all, after all her cherished dreams of afternoon drives in Central Park, in a doctor's buggy and with the doctor himself by her side, she was doomed to be the wife of that clumsy rustic who did not even know how to shake hands or to bow to a lady, or who could not say a word without performing some grotesque gesture or curling his horrid side locks. Okay, so what are these side locks? I think I discussed them a little bit earlier. These long sideburns they're called payas. This creates the other. This creates those that are different, that look different. Again, her suicide, she calls, so the suicide is how badly she feels about being imprisoned. Isn't America about freedom? Isn't that why Italian people and Irish people and the Puritans and Bulgarians and Romanians and people from all over the world in the 19th and 20th and continue on in the 21st century come to America for freedom? This is something that Flora would be expecting. She feels imprisoned. In fact, the word exiled here, I think, is particular and important because someone who is exiled is forced to leave their native country. So that may characterize the relationship that Azriel and Flora have with Provli, although I don't think they were forced per se, but forced in a way that they felt there was an absence of opportunity and education and materiality and things like that. But Flora feels that she is becoming an exile within her own house. So we get this sense of greater marginalization, separation, and so on and so forth. The difficulty between Azriel and Flora is exemplified in the next dozen pages or so on page 922, paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, beginning with I beg you. I beg you, my daughter, do not shorten my days and come downstairs, he entreated with heartfelt ardor. I have so little to live, and the uppermost has sent me a piece of comfort so that I may die a righteous Jew. Will you take it away from me? Will you put me to shame before God and man? The words and the pathos with which they were delivered so oddly contrasted with all she knew of her father that she felt as if he were really praying for his life. Azriel he calls himself a bore. He's fumbling. He misreads his daughter. He misunderstands his daughter, all of those sorts of things. But I think the complexity of the character comes out in moments like this because I think even though we don't have to be a Jewish person, we don't have to be a middle-aged man, we don't have to be all of these different things, let's say, that Azriel is, we feel the pathos of this. He loves his daughter, he wants what's best for her, but he's also trying to save himself. There's that hint now that Azriel, now that he's older, that perhaps pursuing the American dream, perhaps pursuing being in America and his faith lapsing, now he's getting older, and there's this possibility that the absence of faith in the pursuit of the American dream might cause some sort of eternal consequences in the afterlife. Okay. So while there is this growing antagonism between Azriel and Flora, well, Shia is kind of an interesting new pet in the household. On page 925, this is in section 8, second paragraph from the bottom. Flora was getting used to Shia's presence in the house, as if he actually were a newly discovered brother of hers, brought up in a queer way which she could not understand. And it was only occasionally and at the growing intervals that the situation would burst upon her, and she would plead with her father as she had done. So this, I think, sort of begins, the familiarity, having somebody young in the house that if she wants, she can talk to, and then she remembers, oh, I'm supposed to marry this guy. He's so strange looking with his strange ways and all of these sorts of things. But we also see, I think, in a very traditional way, Flora, she wants to be married to a doctor, and she wants to go out with her friends, and she wants to have diamonds and rubies. We also see a very traditional maternal instinct in Flora in terms of her desire to take Shia under her wing, if you will, and begin to teach him the ways of America. Smart is smart, no matter what gender, no matter what language, no matter what culture. And Shia, being a prodigy in religious studies in Provli, makes strides in America. It says on page 926, the paragraph beginning upon the whole in the middle of the page. Anybody with me? Upon the whole, Shia took the situation quite recklessly. He studied his Talmud and his English. Let Tamara, the housekeeper of Azriel's household, let Tamara cloy him with all sorts of tidbits and roam about the streets and public buildings. In less than 6 months, he knew the city and its suburbs much better than Flora, and could tell the meaning of thousands of printed English words, although he neither knew how to use them himself nor recognize them in the speech of others. What does this mean? Does this mean that Shia is so much more intelligent than Flora? I don't think that's the case at all. How is it that Shia is able to learn more about America and its geography, its places, and things like that in such a short period of time? This is not a function of intelligence. This is a function, I would argue, of gender. Flora, she is an American, however, she is a young woman. There are limitations as to where she can travel to, where she can roam, both in terms of it being traditional. You are a woman, you should not go around to these places. You can't go to a restaurant, let's say, and sit by yourself and eat and spend 5 hours drinking, coffee at Starbucks while you're updating your story. She can't do that. Shia, he doesn't really know the language, but he's a man, and we start to see a shift in power. First, Flora had a kind of power over Shia, but Shia is a man, and that inherently comes with a power that he then begins to assert because of his gender, and later on it becomes even stronger in his assertion. All of this new information that Shia is introduced to, curiosity, desire for knowledge. At the bottom of page 927, no, I was not, may I not live till tomorrow if I was, he protested vehemently with a touch of resentment. Oh, it is so nice to be there. I never knew there were so many Gentile books in the world at all. I wonder what they were all about. Only I am so troubled about my English. He interrupted himself with a distressed air. When I asked them for the book and how to get it, they could not understand me. So he begins going to libraries. He begins, his English teacher begins to introduce him to other topics. And what Shia begins to do, rather than per the cautionary note from Azriel, which is you be a good boy and study Talmud, he begins to lie to Azriel in order to gain knowledge of things that have nothing to do with Talmud or his religious faith. What we also see is a continuing development of the relationship between Shia and Flora. And I really think this is very nicely done. These are two young people thrown together, and we don't immediately, see that they have any sort of passion, sexual passion, romantic passion for one another, except for Flora's, her passion would be in not wanting to be with Shia at all. But we see on page 928, in the middle of the page, and really I think Flora is seen as a woman by Shia for the first time. And this is going to begin to change, I think, Flora. Flora doesn't necessarily see herself as a sexual being, a young woman who has both real romantic, not fairy tale, but real romantic or passionate desires. But she, I think, begins to see this by recognizing that Shia sees this in her. They were seated at a respectful distance, with the corner of the marble table between them, her full, well-modeled bust erect and stately against the pier glass. She wore a waist of dark blue silk, trimmed with red, and there was a ribbon in her shock of inky hair. Presently she leaned forward to see a mispronounced word for herself. Their heads found themselves close together. Her ivory cheek almost touched his. "Where is it?" she questioned, under her breath. He made no reply. His glance was riveted to her raven eyelashes. A dash of scarlet lurking under her chin dazed his brain. So he's looking at Flora now as a sexual being, as a person that has some, that there's an association here of romance and passion. Where was I at? After a slight pause, he said, as he timidly stroked her burning cheek, "It is so smooth." She had an impulse to withdraw her face, but felt benumbed. He went on patting her until, meeting with no resistance, his lips touched her cheek in a gingerly kiss. Both lowered their eyes. They were silent, but their hearts, each conscious of the other beatings, throbbed wildly. So I think a really nice moment here between the two. Okay, I am on page 936. This is chapter 10. And this is where Azriel is told and realizes that Shia has been doing things that he's not supposed to be doing. Second paragraph in chapter 10. To his consternation, he learned that his daughter's bridegroom had not been seen there for weeks. Azriel held his counsel and took to shadowing the young man. He now had no doubt as to the accuracy of Reb Zalal's story, but it gave him no pain. It was Shia no longer. It was not his daughter's bridegroom. It was not the prodigy he had imported. It was an apikoros. But then Azriel's heart withered at the notion of being the victim of systematic deception. Shia was an apikoros and a secret, sneaking enemy. So I think we feel here Azriel's pain, whether or not we agree with what he had tried to do in setting up his daughter by bringing home this bridegroom. But now he was trying to, as he has done throughout this story, shown his love for Flora, but now Flora is even further away. She's part of this conspiracy. And it says in the bottom of page 937, a terrific pain smote Azriel's heart. It was as if he saw his temple, the embodiment of many years of labor, the object of his fondest cares, just completed and ready to be dedicated, suddenly enveloped in flames. And I think this is a powerful moment, again, where we see the pathos of Azriel, both in terms of him being an immigrant and stuck between two different countries, more or less, and the disappointment he feels with his relationship with his future bridegroom, his daughter, and what might happen to him when he dies. So Azriel has a confrontation with Flora. And this, I think, puts in position, not only in terms of Azriel's identity or the immigrant's identity between the old country and the new country, but also what kind of changes for the negative the new country might have, not just in terms of memory, not just in terms of identity, but in the trajectory of someone's life, what materialism might mean, what America might mean. Page 940, he is talking to Flora, third paragraph down. I know you are not to blame, he said, tragic in his calmness. America has done it all, but what is the use talking? It's gone, and I am not going to take another sin upon my soul. I won't let you be his wife without canopy and dedication. Let the Jewish wedding come off at once this week. Tomorrow, you have got the best of me, and I don't kick, do I? It seems God does not want Azrielki, the boar, to have some joy in his old age, nor a Kaddish for his soul, when the worms will be feasting upon his silly bones. So I believe at this point, Shia and Flora went and got a civil marriage, and now Azriel wants them to have a Jewish wedding to consummate their uh, their marriage in Jewish legal terms. A couple paragraphs down, as he said it, he felt as if Flora too were a stranger to him. He descended to the basement in a state of mortal indifference. I have lost everything tomorrow, he said. I have no daughter either. I am all alone in the world, alone as a stone. And ultimately, I think this text is talking about the marginalization, the loneliness of the immigrant and all of these different facets of the immigrant's life. And we have the undertone, the religious undertone of what might happen or the fear of what might happen to Azriel in the afterworld. Where does he descend to? He descends to the basement. In literature, on our Batman utility belt of detective literary tools, if you will, we've talked about seasons. We've talked in terms of archetypal symbols. We've talked about seasons. We've talked about times of day. How about geographic space? Movement up, ascension, could be something spiritual, could be something rewarding, could be something redemptive. Something that goes down is something maybe transgressive, associated with sin, and maybe most importantly has the possibility of being associated with hell. So that Azrael ascends downward is his fear. Symbolically, this represents his fear of what might happen to him in the afterlife. Flora and Shia get married both civilly and in terms of the Jewish faith. We see here that Azrael is all alone, and almost as an afterthought, the end of this chapter on page 941, very much I would suggest to us in a very Job-like way. Azrael, this Jewish immigrant figure, I think becomes a Job-like figure. That wherever he turns to, he is sort of rebuffed and has to manage his own suffering, manage his own faith. So I think there's some interesting comparisons that we can make. What is the story of Job? I think the story of Job is one of the most popular and maybe the most secular stories in the Hebrew Bible. You have the figure of Job, the character of Job, who is very, very faithful, and you have an angel. Later on, he might be called the devil. You have an angel that says to the figure of God, well, yeah, Job, it's easy for him to be so faithful, so religious, to adhere to religious law. He has everything. He has a big fancy house. He has lots of horses. He has lots of cattle. He has 10 children. He has all of these things, goats and sheep, and he has a new Xbox and a fancy car, and he has a second home, and he has all of these things. What would happen if we took all of these things away from him? Would Job still be so faithful? And so, one by one, the figure of God kills his children. His camels and horses and everything they're attacked and killed. His house burns down. And sort of one of the pivotal moments in the book of Job is Job's wife says to Job, okay, you've lost everything. Apparently, nobody thought it would be worthwhile to make Job suffer by him losing his wife. Perhaps that's a statement about the state of Job's marriage, or marriage in general in the ancient world. But his wife is still around, and his wife says to Job, now you can curse God. And Job says, no, I will not do that. And the story of Job is a kind of trial. Job has three friends. They each come to talk to him. Job tells them his story, and each of these friends aren't very much comfort. They tell him basically, if you have sinned, you have sinned. That is why this has happened to you. And if you would not have sinned, this would not have happened to you. One of the ways with which people oftentimes, I think, misconstrue the story of Job is why do bad things happen to good people? And I say it's a kind of misunderstanding of that book, because I think a better way of understanding that text is, how do we understand bad things when they happen to us? Because ultimately, life, if it's not about suffering, there are moments of suffering in a person's life. And so Job goes through these with his friends, and he doesn't get satisfaction. In some versions of Job, there's a fourth character, a kind of prophet, but most scholars think that was added later, who sort of defends Job. But this is a kind of court case, and Job gets his day in court. He gets to face the accused. I'm sorry, the accuser. He is the accused, and he gets to face the figure of God. And Job is like, God, I'm faithful, I do this, I do that, I do this. And really one of the most beautiful passages, I think, in the entirety of the Hebrew Bible is God says, really? Were you there when I made the heavens? And Job was like, yeah, I don't really know about that. I think you got me there. The figure of God says, were you there when I made the rules of the oceans and the paths of the moon and all of these things that God is saying from the whirlwind? And Job is like, yeah, you kind of got me there. Meaning that suffering can't be placed at the feet of God, but it's something that I think us as people, that Job as a person, has to reconcile the very physical and emotional aspects of suffering with one's faith. And so I think that we can apply that to Azrael. We see the burgeoning of love between Shia and Flora, and as a kind of afterthought, Azrael asks Tamara, what do you got going on? Hey, you want to go to Israel? You want to get married? And there's not a lot of passion here. Let's just take a look at this passage just before the end of chapter 11 on page 941. You know that I have on my tongue what I have on my lung, Tamara. I mean what I say, and we want no matchmakers. America is now treif to me. I can't show my head. The world is dark and empty to me. All is gone, gone, gone. I am a little baby, Tamara. Come, take pity. I shall see Flora married according to the laws of Moses and Israel, and then let us put up a canopy and set out on our journey. I want to be born again. Well, there was no response. Well, Tamara, since it is the will of God, she returned resignedly, without raising her head from the vestments. Again, I think there's no passion here. At the same time, Tamara is kind of a lonely figure in and of herself. And maybe the best that both Job, going back to my comparison with Job, now Job has a happy ending, which is problematic in many, many ways. But here, Azrael doesn't really have a happy ending. It's satisfying, in a kind of, okay, I guess I'll reconcile this with the way that it is. I'll accept my suffering in this. Tamara being a lonely figure, Azrael being a lonely figure. Let's get together. I guess if it's God's will, it is God's will. Now that Shia and Flora are married, this should have a happy ending, right? Flora and Shia get married. Shia can study his non-Jewish intellectual pursuits. Flora has some pride in her husband. Her opinion has changed in terms of wanting to marry a doctor. Azrael has come to some sort of acceptance of the situation and is going to marry tomorrow. Does the story end here? No. I talked earlier about the differences between men and women in terms of opportunity and what was allowed and what wasn't allowed. We saw that early on in the text with Shia getting a lay of the land in a way that Flora really didn't, or a much larger knowledge geographically of the area that they lived in, the outer community, things like that, because Shia was a man. The end of this text, and this is, I think, where Cahan really expertly problematizes, much like in some ways, again, going back to Job, but problematizes life. There are no happy endings, or there are no clear-cut things, there are no clear-cut endings that suggest it's going to be happy or not happy. Flora was a kind of conspirator with Shia in the deception of her father. Now that they're married, she got what she wants, Shia is getting what he wants. But when a woman becomes married, she becomes something different. Now, a young woman, 19th century, 20th century, early 20th century, even 21st century in parts of this country, parts around the world, a woman changes. What a woman can and cannot do, what a woman can own and cannot own, the power within a household. A woman has a certain amount of autonomy, being single, a certain amount, but in many ways less autonomy, at least as represented in this text, when, for instance, when Flora here becomes married. On page 942, in the middle of the page, the paragraph beginning Flora. Flora felt a lump growing in her heart. The notion of Shia being at this minute interested in anything outside of herself and their mutual happiness literally dazed her. And before she had time to recover from her shock, she was in the overcrowded attic. So this is a young married woman wanting attention from her husband. She gave him a lot of attention, but something has changed. And on page 943, so they're up in the attic, he's with his study group, they're reading non-Jewish literature, non-Jewish things, Gentile information about the world as Shia pursues his non-Jewish intellectual interests. He's reading about the philosophy of science and French philosophy, and these things, I would argue, are superseding his previous interest in Flora. It says at the bottom of page 943, a couple paragraphs in the bottom, Shia, it is getting late in Papa. 1 second. Do please, Flora, may you live long, he implored her with some irritation. And taking the book from the Scotchman's hands, he fell to turning over its leaves in a feverish search of what struck him as a misinterpreted passage. Flora was going to protest and to threaten to leave without him, but she could neither speak nor stir from her seat. A nightmare of desolation and jealousy choked her. And this is the new position that Flora is in with her new husband, Shia. The more things have changed, the more that there has been transformation, both from Shia and Azriel and Flora. When we get to the end of this text, firmly traditional gender roles have been re-entrenched and reinforced. And this is what I think one of the many facets that complicate our understanding of Cahan's The Imported Bridegroom. Thank you.